I was just thinking about our personal aesthetic, each and every one of us. What defines it? What created it? We each see beauty, especially where photographs are concerned. We see beauty and we see intrigue in different ways. What put that in our heads? What defined that? And I think it's got to go back to childhood, right? It's got to go back to either some experiences that you had, or some trauma, something you were exposed to that just kind of etched itself into the way that you saw the world, the way that you think about visual beauty. I mean, certainly some of that stuff has to be something that you're born with, maybe passed on through DNA, but a lot of it's got to be just exposure to something. Now, when I got into photography as a kid, I just kind of ran with it, and that's what we do. We find an interest and we run with it, and we don't really think about what we're exposing ourselves to. It just kind of happens. We find resources, or we find inspiration. We find things that influence us, but we don't really consider, okay, well, is this the right thing I need to be exposing myself to at the time? Unless you're going through some kind of a formal education. If you're a self-taught person, then the things that you're exposed to, a lot of it is just luck. Let me show you something here. You see this. This is a series of books by Time Life, and it is the Library of Photography. And these were among the first books I was exposed to, and they featured images, just amazing images. Even the paper that these books were printed on and the ink that was used and just the way that the stuff was printed is pretty amazing. Some of the pages are kind of silvery and shiny, and the ink that was used is just, it feels like a substance, like a pigment just raised off of the page a little bit. But I can certainly trace a lot of my aesthetic back to these books, and there is I picked out a couple of pictures. This book in particular, the color book, had to deal with color photography. There were a couple of images here. I'm going to have to censor one of them, but one is by Evelyn Hofer and the other is by Jay Maisel. And these, I can tell you right now, had a profound effect on my aesthetic for whatever reason. One is a window light portrait. It's got a young girl standing in front of a window. The way the light is coming through, it's broad, but it's a little contrasty. Part of her face kind of disappears into the shadows, and then just the way that the background is illuminated partially by the window, and it's got kind of this natural vignette. That image is like magic to me. I think I first saw this image when I must have been around 13 or 14 years old. When I was just getting into photography, and that to me just stood out as amazing portraiture. It feels a little rustic, a little painterly, kind of raw, and a little sexy. So I think you can look at my images now and you can kind of trace some of the sensibilities back to this image. And then there is this one, which, now this is hard to put into words. I don't know what it is about this image that just must have etched itself into my brain, but it's just amazing. A little Marilyn Monroe there, I think, but the pose, the lines, the curves, the sensuality, the light. I'm sure without even knowing it, without even thinking about it at the time, like years and years, decades later, many of my images have been influenced or inspired by this one single image. It's iconic to me. It might not be something you've ever seen, but I had these Time Life books as a kid and literally didn't see them again for decades. But when I did flip through them again after some nearly 40 years, those images, I recognized them immediately. It was as if I had seen them yesterday. Back in the day, we didn't have the internet. If we wanted to learn something, if we found a new interest, we went to the library or we bought some books at the bookstore. We looked at some magazines. And see, those things, those resources were usually curated or edited. There was a higher standard, so they usually pulled from better material to help people with these new interests along. So many of us were influenced by the masters, right? The thing I worry about these days are the people who are getting into photography now, and their first real exposure or education to photography are images that are, like on Facebook groups where you just go through a series, just constant stream of images that are unremarkable. They're typical. There's nothing special about them, but the newbie will come in and look at them and maybe rightfully so, be impressed with the lighting or even the subject. But again, without being exposed to the masters, without being exposed to truly iconic photography or inspired photography, or the amazing work that you won't find shared in a Facebook group, without being exposed to those things, the beginner is coming in on a deficit. They're missing something that they don't even know that they're missing. I mean, personally, I think that's kind of sad. All right, so here's a question. What helped define your particular aesthetic? What helped define how you see photography, how you see the world through photography? What looks beautiful to you in pictures? What would you consider a beautiful photograph or an example of a beautiful photograph? And why do you think that is? Where do you think that sense came from for you? All right, now if you can't really answer that question, are you pretty sure that the answer to that question isn't the right one? Then I would suggest that you start looking into the Masters of Photography. Now there's actually a website I will look at occasionally or refer people to. It's called mastersofphotography.com, and it's hyphenated, so it's masters-of-photography.com. Go ahead and have a look at that, and you can run through a series of really iconic pictures. They're broken up by photographer, so you can kind of familiarize yourself with that. But there are plenty of them. I'm going to go ahead and include a list of some of the ones that I think are important. It's definitely not going to be everyone. It's just going to be people that I guess come off the top of my head. I just think it's so important to expose yourself to some of the better work that came before now. Anyway, that was on my mind today, so I thought I'd bring it up. I think I'm going to go ahead and get myself a set of those Time Life books. It's been a long time since I had a set of my own. Hey, thanks for hanging out with me today. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't already, go ahead and click subscribe and leave me a comment and tell me what has inspired you over the years, what's influenced you, what's developed your sense of beauty in photography. I'll thank you in advance, and I'll see you next time.